right.
Okay, can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Hello? Can anybody hear me? Okay. Well, welcome to the Historical Museum's first, and we are the first wagon to go on the cemetery tour. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming. The Edwardsburg Cemetery was established in the mid-1830s. It was also known as the Pleasant Lake Cemetery. And it should be noted that you can find headstones in the cemetery that are prior to 1834, but there's no bodies with them. The families placed them in memory of people who they lost back east. Most of the people came from New York that we're seeing today, started out in New York and came to Edwardsburg. The first people buried there were two small boys. Samuel Bacon was 2 years old when he died, and James K. Shanahan was only 1. On August 2nd, in 1837, Sally Clark Olmsted died and was another one of the first people to be buried in the Edwardsburg Cemetery. The cemetery has 1 Revolutionary War veteran, 36 Civil War veterans, 14 veterans from World War I, and 57 from World War II. If you're interested in more information about the cemetery, the village website has a cemetery tab on it, and underneath that tab is a heading called the Red Book. And there's a map of the cemetery and a list of all those who are buried there and their locations. So if you're looking for a particular grave, that's a good place to start. So today, you will be visiting the graves of Dr. Levi Aldrich, Cyrus Bacon, Lottie Pickerl, Vera and Charles Pabreza, Richard Beckwith, and Marjorie Federowski. So thank you for joining us on this trip to Edwardsburg's past and the individuals who lived and worked here. And when we get back to the museum, we do have cider and donuts, so please come in and look around. We have a current photo exhibit up that I think you should all see. So thank you. Hope we have a great time.
Thanks. Please allow me to introduce myself, Dr. Levi Aldrich. My question to you is, can you count to 9? My parents, James and Hannah Aldrich, could. Number 1, Sister Sarah. Number 2, Sister Phoebe. Number 3, Brother Henry. Number 4, Brother, let me think of this one. Brother Nathan. Number 5, Sister Srepta. Number 6, me, Brother Levi. I was born in January 22nd, 1820. Number 7, Brother Addison. Number 8, Brother Mason. And number 9, little Brother Newton. We were a busy household, but because of that, I learned 2 valuable lessons throughout my life. The first one was patience, and the second was getting along with others, which served me well throughout my life. When I got older, I decided that medicine was the field that I wanted to be in, so I attended Salem Academy in Chautauqua, New York. From there, I went into medical school. I went to Albany College of Medicine, and then transferred to Buffalo University, where I graduated and got my degree in 1869 at the age of, 1849, at the age of 29. From there, I started a medical practice and moved to Erie County, New York, where I was actually a doctor for 11 years. As fate would have it, though, I had a medical condition that I don't want to burden you with, so we'll leave that undisclosed. The decision to move to Michigan was a tedious one, and we made quite a few investigations into different things, and I will go through and name some of what was our decision in order for us to move to Cass County here. First, in 1835, the Great Seal of the state of Michigan was adopted. On the bottom of that seal, there's a white ribbon that reads, If you seek a pleasant peninsula, then look about you. That was pleasing to me, very pleasing. Second, in 1836, a Quaker minister employed the Underground Railroad to bring slaves to Cass County to live as free men. I myself was raised as a Quaker, and I did believe in the Quaker doctrine, so that made perfect sense to me. Third, on July 6, 1854, the first Republican National Convention was held in Michigan, and I firmly believe in all their doctrines and everything that they believed in, so I have been a member of the Republican Party since their inception. Lastly, the railroad was very important in the development of any state in any area. So in 1858, the Milwaukee and Detroit Railroad completed a line that ran from Detroit to Grand Haven. That was very important to open up that area. The following year, the Grand Trunk Railroad opened up a line from Detroit to Port Huron, which essentially allowed from Chicago to Port Huron, and that opened up another section of the state. The combination of these advancements to society and also my own health issues was paramount in our decision to buy a property here in Cass County, Michigan. So my wife and I, the former Eveline Sweetland, who I wed in 1850, we moved to Cass County, Michigan, and ended up here in Edwardsburg Village. We decided that when we moved here, we would be retired and just live a nice and peaceful life. However, that was not to be. Benjamin Franklin made a statement that the best physician gives the least medicine. So it was our desire to move here and be retired and give no medicine. But alas, the people in Edwardsburg, after finding out that I had a successful medical practice in New York, politely convinced me to start one here in this village. We built a house and had a beautiful home on the southeast corner of Church and Maple Street. And there we had a very nice existence. Although we had no children of our own, we raised our nephew, Frank Sweetland. That young man followed in my footsteps and became a doctor, and he even graduated from my alma mater, which was Buffalo University Medical School. We're very proud of that young man. At that point, our life were kind of a nice routine, a pleasant routine. We really thoroughly were enjoying ourselves. But all of a sudden, I found myself involved in politics, of all things. At the age of 42, I was elected as a state representative. And following that, I was also elected as a state senator, where I served on the committee of the deaf, dumb, and blind. I also served on the Constitutional Convention of 1862 committee, whereby our revisions were rejected by the voters. At that point in our lives, things were settling down. I became involved in maybe trying to get a railroad station in the city. The line went through Edwardsburg, but we had no railroad depot. So with my affluence as in politics and also some local constituents, we were able to convince the lines to put a depot here in Edwardsburg. In 1893, we call it to this day the Chicago 1893 World's Fair, but it was actually considered the Columbian Exposition for the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. That was held again in Chicago, which aligned with the depots, and we had a continuous amount of traffic up and down Michigan. Sadly, though, there was a terrible, terrible accident on the Grand Trunk line up at Battle Creek, where two engines hit head on. Unfortunately, 26 people were killed, including my dear Eveline. If I had to say or surmise one word for my life, it would be proud. I'm proud to have serviced my patients in New York and in Michigan. I'm proud that we brought a railroad into this community. I'm proud to have served the constituents as capacity of the state representative. We were definitely proud about raising such a fine and young man as Frank Sweetland, who turned out to have an exemplary career in medicine. And last but not least, I am proud that we were able to have a lovely home and allow the future generations to live and enjoy it. I bid you guys a pleasant evening and a pleasant afternoon. I thank you for being here. Dr. Levi Aldrich, at your service.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move across the street.
The thunder of the inland sea unite in one grand symphony of Michigan, my Michigan. I fell in love with Michigan the first time I saw her, when I came here to survey and possibly buy some land. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me begin at the beginning. I am Cyrus Bacon. I was born in 1796 in Saratoga County, New York, to David and Hannah Bacon. My parents were farmers, and it was their love and devotion to the land that led me to become a surveyor. In 1822, I married my lovely wife, Melinda, and shortly thereafter I served as a captain in the New York State Militia. Our first child, Samuel Lewis Bacon, was born in 1823. 2 years later, he was joined by a brother, Jacob, and then a sister, Elizabeth. Sadly, Jacob and Elizabeth died in infancy, and Samuel died when he was a mere 2 years of age. And our third son was born in, 1827. So, yeah. With the completion of the Erie Canal in 1825, the travel to the west became much easier. And since land was cheaper in Michigan and more plentiful than in the east, I traveled here to survey around Saline, Michigan. The land was not exactly what I was looking for, so I returned to New York and did a lot of surveying around large portions of Chautauqua County. Michigan, however, was always on my mind. So in early 1830, there's a migration called Michigan Fever. Land was at the right price and there was plenty of it. And they needed more population in order to apply for statehood. So, but then my younger brother, Nathaniel, moved to a place in Niles in 1833. He assured me that the land there was much more to my liking, and it was. In 1834, I packed up my wife Melinda, 6-year-old David, and we traveled to Ontawa Township, where the land was flat, fertile, and perfect for farming. Fred Garver sold us 720 acres just south of Edwardsburg on Redfield Road for $6,000. That year, as we were building our home, our son James was born. Our young family was becoming settled and growing in number. David and James were joined in 1837 by Cyrus Jr. 4 years later, Sarah was born, and then Stephen in 1844. We were a close-knit, hard-working Edwardsburg, Michigan family. Our first year of farming, we raised nearly 9,000 bushels of oats and sold them for $1 a bushel. I continued my surveyor work and I got into local government. In 1847, I became township supervisor, In 1849, I was elected to the Michigan State Legislature, where I served on the House Ways and Means Committee. I was a magistrate for 20 years and an associate judge. I was president of the Cass County Bible Society and the first treasurer of the St. Peter's Masonic Lodge, and that was in 1958. Melinda and I agree that our 5 children have been the pride of our lives. David graduated from Jefferson College, became a lawyer, and worked with my brother in Niles. Nathaniel, the head of the law firm? Yeah. James became a farmer and took over the family farm. Cyrus graduated from medical college in Washington, D.C. He opened his first practice in Mishawaka. Sarah married the Reverend John Boone, and she dedicated her life to the church. Stephen attended Aldrich College, became an attorney, and practiced law in Wisconsin. 2 of our sons were in the Civil War. David was a captain in the Michigan 6th Infantry and was wounded in the Battle of Baton Rouge. When he returned to duty, he served as a lieutenant colonel of the 19th Michigan Infantry. Cyrus Jr. was the Surgeon General of the U.S. Army in the Civil War. He was plagued with the illness stemming from his military service, and died at the young age of 33. His Civil War diary is in the state, is in the archives of our state. As for me, I was blessed with a life of service for 77 years, and in 1873 I went to my rest peacefully in Michigan, my Michigan.
And it was 1891. My parents were Gideon and Eva Logan. My mother used to say things like, patience is a virtue, and kindness is contagious. And my father, too, he had some words of wisdom. He would say things like, never leave the field until the work is done. And the more you learn, the more you earn. My father used to let me work in his store at a very young age, and I really liked that. And I remember one day, a lady came into the store, and she walked up to me and she said, "You're a very pretty girl." I was so taken back because I had never ever thought about that before. I thought I was a pretty ordinary person. But then she said, "But looks don't matter. Actions do." And from that day on, I decided I was going to be a helpful, giving person. That was going to be my kind of pretty. And so, in 1912, I started teaching at Jefferson School in South Bend, Indiana. I loved teaching. 6 years later, I married Marion C. Pickerl. But then I was forced to leave the classroom, because in those days, if you were a woman teacher, you were forbidden to marry. So I left. But I always vowed deep in my heart that I was going to return to the classroom someday. In 1920, they passed the 19th Constitutional Amendment. I was among the first women in Indiana that cast a vote in a federal election. I was very proud of that. In 1922, Marion and I bought the Lee farm in Edwardsburg, Michigan. So one interesting fact about that is that in the Civil War, part of our house had been used to harbor slaves during the Civil War that were traveling the Underground Railroad. So Marion and I settled into farming, and pretty soon we started our family. Little Mary was only 10 months old when she died of pneumonia. Second born was Jean, our daughter Jean, and then our son Logan came along. In 1931, life was pretty simple on the farm. It was busy. Ours was the very first registered dairy, and we called it Maple Crest because it was near the crest of a hill, and it was also, it had a row of maple trees around it. And they passed this law that said that you had to pasteurize milk if you were going to sell it. So we had the very first pasteurizer in Edwardsburg. We also had the very first septic tank in town. And it was used as a demonstrator so that our neighbors could come over and take a look at how the tiles were laid for the system so that they could go back and install their own systems. And then in 1931, Marion died suddenly. It was such a shock. Still is. I was 40 years old. I had 2 young children and $7,000 worth of debt to pay back. That's when the real work started. I would get up every morning at 3:30 and I would feed and water 26 cows, 2 horses, and 300 chickens. Our electric pump had gone out, so I had to pump the water by hand. By 5 o'clock a.m., I had the milk wagon loaded with the milk bottles ready for delivery. I would wake the children and they would help me do the milk route. We would usually get back to the farm around 7 o'clock in time for school. With the children in school, I could finish the rest of the chores. The milking, the bottling, the pasteurizing, the refrigerating. We got our ice from Pleasant Lake, and we stored it in the ice room. So life went on. I also made a habit of tapping the maple trees, and I would boil the sap over a big copper kettle over an open fire, and I would get around 22 gallons of maple syrup. I also put up 25 gallons of apple butter. Even with all of that, we hardly made enough to live on. So eventually I had to look around for a buyer, and I found one. With the sale of the farm, I was able to pay off half of my debt, and I got a house in South Bend, Indiana, as part of the deal. Times were tough during the Depression, and I had to turn that house, part of it, into a nursing home to make ends meet. It was really a tough time. I would rather have been teaching, but with only a primary certificate, I could only do substitute work, and that did not pay well. Well, eventually in 1964, South Bend offered a teaching job to me, and I took it, but only with the promise. I had to promise that I would go back and take certification classes. So I did. At the age of 70, I earned my Bachelor of Arts degree, and I went on record as being the oldest recipient of that degree in history of Bethel College. So I taught a few years, and then the South Bend schools told me I was too old to teach. So I found a job, and it was at the Edwardsburg Elementary. I taught 10 more years. I retired at the age of 80, but I didn't stop there. I went and visited the Holy Lands and the North Pole. I taught Sunday school and quilting classes. I belonged to the Women's Christian Club, and the Florence Crittenden Circle helping unwed mothers. I also taught piano lessons, and I played the organ at church. I was a DAR, and I belonged to the Women's Temperance Union. Then I was able to finally publish my book called Exciting True Stories. And I was 98 when I did it. Henry Ford once said, anybody who stops learning, whether it be at 20 or 80, is old. Well, the good Lord let me learn and teach to the ripe old age of 108.
Wow.
And I think old Henry would have been proud. Thank you for coming today, and I hope that none of you grow old because you stop learning or unlearning or relearning.
Story of an immigrant couple. Charles Pabreza, born in 1901 and died in 1990. Vera Pabreza, born in 1906, passed away in 1992. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, is probably the most familiar sentence of the sonnet, The New Colossus, inscribed on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. If this had no meaning to me in 1909, when I was 3 years old, holding my mother's skirt as she held my 6-month-old brother, Wally, standing on the deck of the ship Potsdam, entering the harbor of New York after several weeks in steerage at sea, coming from our home in Lithuania.
In July 1909, when I was 8, my mother rose and I traversed the sea from Lithuania to New York on the board of ship Russia. We would go to Brighton, Massachusetts to be with my father Casimir, and later with sister Julie and her husband Frank Bushman.
We did not speak or understand English, and I wonder how we made it from Ellis Island to Chicago, where my dad was. He worked in the steel mills, and we lived in a Lithuanian ghetto. The Catholic Church was our guide to help us in our new country. I went to school until the 3rd grade. I was needed to help care for our growing family, 11 children in total from 1906 to 1923, with 3 dying in childhood. I was diagnosed with tuberculosis at age 13 and was sent to the municipal TB sanitarium in the Chicago area, where I stayed for several months. Treatment included sleeping on an open porch, with sometimes snow drifting across the blankets. After I was released, I went to work for a Jewish couple as a nanny.
Our family moved to Chicago in 1917 and Michigan in 1919 to a farm owned by my brother-in-law Frank Bushman, where we were sharecroppers. I stayed for a while, then went back to Chicago and worked various jobs, including chauffeuring.
I met Charles in Chicago through my sister May. My father took me to Michigan to meet his family. His mother liked me, so we married at the Cass County Courthouse on January 11th, 1926. His family, now including us, continued sharecropping. In May of 1927, we had a little girl, Anna, who only lived a few hours. Our second son, George, was born in February of 1929. Weighing only 3 pounds, I feared losing him, so I kept him on my chest to keep him warm in that cold farmhouse. In July of 1932, our second son, Bob, was born. Then a girl, Patsy, in 1941, and another son, Tony, in 1943. He was born with a fractured skull during an extremely difficult birth. We feared he would not be normal, but he fooled us.
We lived on several farms until 1945, when we found farming would not support us. We had an auction sale of all of our implements and animals and then we purchased a house on Main Street and moved into the village. The house had no running water or central heat. I worked on the railroad and then Tyler's and Niles before Bill Meredith and I bought the gas station inventory from the Taylors. The station was located on the corner of US 12 and Lake Street. He was a silent partner until I bought him out and operated the station for 30 plus years.
I was a stay-at-home mom with a big garden and lots of chickens, many ending up as Sunday dinners. Over the years, to earn more income, we began acquiring rental properties in the area, many housing my siblings who fell on hard times. We bought the building next door that was once a hotel. We operated it as an apartment house and a boarding house. In about 1950, when my sister's life was traumatized and she was unable to care for her two boys, they came to live with us and were raised as our own.
Our children grew, graduated from high school, some from trade school or university, married and blessed us with grandchildren. After selling the station inventory, I went to work at another station and kept a big garden. My health deteriorated with the onset of heart disease, open heart surgery, and then prostate cancer. My loving wife of 64 years cared for me with help from our children and grandchildren during these last years.
After being diagnosed with colon cancer, I went to live with George and Alice, who cared for me, with Pat coming in after work. Bob and Ruth came to stay so George and Alice could vacation. Grandchildren also came to relieve the caregivers who so lovingly cared for me until I went to join Charles.
We left this country no longer poor, but rich in love, peace, and full of faith. Our huddled masses are those who touched our lives throughout life's journey. And that's it.
That's our story.
Richard Beckwith. My friends and family call me Dick, and sometimes Paul. I was born on the family farm in Jefferson Township near Cassopolis in 1910. I am the fourth of 5 children, all girls except for me. My father died when I was 4 years old, so I learned to work hard very early in life. I helped deliver milk when I was just 5 years old. My early school years were spent on the top floor of what is now the Cassopolis History Museum. In my later years, I attended the Cassopolis High School. In addition to my studies, I played football and baseball and ran track. I graduated in 1928. I was living in Dowagiac when I met the love of my life. Adelaide Runkle of Edwardsburg, and married her in 1934. We eloped and drove for a honeymoon to Florida with 2 old ladies as chaperones. After I was married, I was able to get a job with the Michigan State Highway Department. It was difficult or near impossible to get a job during the Depression as an unmarried man. In 1939, I purchased for $700 an older home in Edwardsburg on Barber Street that needed lots of repair just to make it livable. So began my lifetime of fixing things up. I was pretty handy at just about everything. Adelaide and I had 2 children. We had 5 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren. We were married for 74 years. I was a member of the Presbyterian Church in Edwardsburg since 1940 and served my family's church in every way possible throughout my life. I was a member of St. Peter's Lodge 106 in Edwardsburg for over 69 years and served there in a variety of functions. I was a 32-degree Mason and held the position of treasurer for 53 of those years. I was also a member of the Shriners and facilitated medical help in local children. I gradually took over the State Farm insurance business here in Edwardsburg for my wife's father, and operated that office myself for over 25 years. My son took over when I retired. I served on the Edwardsburg Public Library Board when it was owned by the village of Edwardsburg. I collected all donation funds for the library addition and directed its construction. I also served on the board of this fine cemetery, where I served as president and secretary, as well as a sexton. Come to think of it, I had my fingers in just about everything in the village of Edwardsburg. I had a servant spirit, and it led me to do just that, serve my family, my church, and the village of Edwardsburg. I drove the Edwardsburg ambulance in the late 1960s and was a volunteer fireman. I was active with the school board and in the construction of the school buildings as well as athletic programs. I reorganized the Cub Scouts in 1947 with Otis Montgomery. I planted over 100 new trees in the tree lawns throughout the village, installed many water lines with the help of my grandson when the city water was installed in the village. I was elected to every position on the village council. I was active with the Historical Museum and received the Dr. Sweetland Award for outstanding citizenship and goodwill. My wife and I traveled to Europe 3 times. I was struck by the flower boxes we saw in homes in small towns and villages we visited. So, when I got home, I built and installed red painted flower boxes on every window in my home. In fact, those flower boxes are still there. I spent the majority of my life living in the village of Edwardsburg at my home in Barber Street. I watched the land across the street from my house go from hay and cornfields to well-kept homes. I spent many evenings with Adelaide sitting outdoors, watching the neighborhood children grow up and leave, and new people move in with more children. My hope was that the village of Edwardsburg is a better place for my having lived here.
Hello. My favorite Sunday school hymn, was "Brighten the Corner Where You Are." And looking back over my life, it seems to have been my motto. I'm Marjorie Jane Silver Federowski. I was born on December 19th, 1928, to Benjamin and Lula Silver. Actually, I was born on the 20th, a couple minutes after midnight. But the doctor said, since it was so close, he gave my mother the option, and she said, since I did most of the laboring on the 19th, that day would work out just fine. As a young girl growing up in the Depression, it was hard, especially when my father passed away when I was 14 years old. I learned then, when life throws you a curveball, learn to duck and then make another plan. So, since I enjoyed entertaining young children, I started a neighborhood nursery. And for 15 cents an hour, I taught children colors, numbers, words. We did crafts, and I read them some of my favorite books that I enjoyed. And that was from 9 till noon, all through the summer vacation. When I graduated in 1945, our neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Beardsley, offered to send me to Western Michigan University. Well, that certainly did brighten my corner. They obviously saw something in me. and they offered to pay everything except my books. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in library science, English, and a minor in history. After college, I started a bookmobile in Brown County because I wanted to get books in the hands of those who could not get it for themselves. In 1955, I returned to Cass County to head up the Cass County Library, and a year later married Alexander Francis Federowski. Together, we raised 5 children. I spent a lot of time with my hearing-impaired son, Dan, driving him back and forth to Berrien Springs, because back then there wasn't any transportation for school children outside of his district. So I would drive Dan and pick up a few other kids along the way. I became active in the Michigan Parents of Hearing Impaired, which became a lobbying group and was instrumental in passing Michigan Public Act 198 that required the school districts to provide transportation outside of their district. Eventually, I returned to my librarian position, and I worked tirelessly to create the new Cass County District Library with its 5 libraries, one of which is here in Edwardsburg. I facilitated the construction by initiating grants to ensure the millage for its operation. I went on to serve as a founding member of the Friends of the Library, the Cass County Historical Commission, was active on the Woodland Library Cooperative Advisory Council, and I was also instrumental in establishment of Southwestern Michigan College and served for many years as a Cass County Commissioner. I also helped establish the Barn Swallow Theater and Helping Hands of Cass County. I served on the Mental Health Board, the Social Services Board, the Cass County Transportation Authority. I was a life member of the Presbyterian Church and a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. I co-headed the capital campaign to build the Ed Lowe Center for the Council on Aging, and as a result was nominated by the COA and became the proud recipient of the 1999-2000 Senior Citizen of the Year for the state of Michigan. In 2007-2008, I was inducted into the Edwardsburg Public Schools Hall of Fame, and in 2012 I was awarded the museum's John B. Sweetland Award. I lived 90 wonderful years, and I did my best to leave this place better every year. So I'm asking all of you to try to brighten the corner where you are.